הניסים ועל הברכן ועל הגבורות ועל התשועות ועל הנפלאות, על הניסים ועל הברכן ועל הגבורות ועל התשועות ועל הנפלאות שעשית לאבותינו בימים ההם בזמן הזה, בזמן הזה שעשית לאבותינו בימים ההם בזמן הזה.
Welcome to Jewish Life, a program presented in cooperation with the Jewish Community Relations Council of New York. I'm your host, Stewart Ain. Every week we present programs of particular interest to the Jewish community. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center of Nassau County. And joining us today will be Helen Turner, the Director of Education, and Thorin Tritter, the museum's Programming Director and Director. Welcome to the program. Hi, Helen. How are you?
Hello, Stewart. I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Very good, thanks. Where are we?
Well, we are standing in the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center's Children's Memorial Garden. This garden was part of the original house, which houses our museum, and became our Children's Memorial Garden after an initiative began in 1996 with pennies that helped turn our garden into a children's memorial garden. This year, the garden has been reopened to feature our new 14 stanchions, which feature quotes from Holocaust survivors, from victims, from resistors, rescuers, and other prolific quotes about this very difficult yet very important time in history.
Wow, where are the stanchions?
The stanchions are located throughout the garden, which is behind me, looking stunning on this beautiful fall day. And they're really designed so that visitors can both enjoy the beauty and tranquility of this garden, this sacred space, while also engaging with this difficult history.
Can we take a look at one of them?
So this is what our stanchions look like throughout the beautiful garden. This is our introductory panel that welcomes you to this special space and shows that it is dedicated to the 1.5 million Jewish children who were murdered during the Holocaust. Stations like this exist throughout the garden so that you can really find a true emotional connection as you walk through.
Right, and how many stanchions did you say there were?
There are 14.
14, and each one has a quote from a survivor?
Each of them has a quote from either a survivor, a rescuer, a resistor, or a prolific thinker talking about this time period.
Right, right. What's one, can you remember one of them? What's most memorable for you?
Ooh, what's most memorable for me? There is a quote by a young lady named Susan, who is 12 years old when she wrote this quote. And she speaks in 1933 about the sickening feeling she has in her stomach about walking to school. And I really enjoy that quote because I think it is so relatable. We all know what it feels like to be nervous or worried. Yet Susan is talking about the changing tide in her country, where now as a Jewish child, she's frightened to go to school because of a political ideology.
1933. 1933, that's stunning. I mean, Hitler first came to power in January of 1933. So she felt it that early.
Yes, she did. Very quickly, the climate changed, and Susan very quickly found this feeling of anxiety and fear as she tried to go to school. And I keep in mind, she's 12. She's 12 years old when she wrote this quote.
Wow.
So, and I think that's really what quotes get to, is the human emotions that people felt while experiencing and living this history in real time.
Okay, we've gone back inside now. And by the way, when you have, say, school groups, where do you put the outside as opposed to the inside? You take them outside first, or do they go inside first?
Stewart, that's a really wonderful question. So whenever we begin with student groups, we like to start them inside the building. This is because we have such an extraordinary museum that's really going to guide them through the history of the Holocaust. And it's from this foundation that we can then transition outside to get more of the personal quotes from people who experienced this history. So our inside provides a beautiful foundation, and the outside really provides a space for reflection and going deeper into the history on a personal level. But great question about how we engage with our student groups.
Right.
If I could add something,
Yeah,
Stewart.
please, Thorin, yes.
One of the stanchions that were placed outside, that's a new addition. And it was partially done in recognition of the need during Corona to be able to bring groups to an outdoor space rather than inside, because our building was closed for Corona for a number of months. We're now open again, but the garden was designed so that even during Corona, groups could come socially distancing and be outside and learn something about the history of the Holocaust as they walk around the outdoor space.
Now you've taken us to this is the very first exhibit as soon as you walk in.
That's right, we're right in the first gallery. And what you're looking at behind us is our photo album. And like a lot of Holocaust museums, we have tried to personalize this history. Oftentimes, I think the Holocaust history is taught with numbers, 6 million victims, 1.5 million Jewish children killed. But we have to remember that we're talking about individuals, 6 million people, 6 million individuals. And so we've got photographs, and these are also photographs not just of random people, but people tied to our community. We're the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center of Nassau County, and we take that very seriously. So these are photographs of survivors who later moved to Nassau County, or to the descendants, the family members who died, the victims in the Holocaust, whose descendants might have survived and moved to Long Island and to Nassau County. So this is very much our community and the community around us.
And you have some children there as well.
Yeah, these are pictures of, they're all taken before 1939, and they're pictures of, in some cases, children who later survived or children who passed away.
And you have some docents who are survivors themselves. Are any of them out on the wall there as a child?
Helen, you want to take that one?
I would love to. So yes, a lot of the people that are featured on this wall are still very active with our community. So the person that I always speak about, someone who's very important to me, is this little boy over here. So this is Werner Reich. Werner Reich, local Holocaust survivor. You can see him pictured there as a child with his sister. He's a very active member of our community, still going out and speaking to thousands of school children across the island. Now, of course, Werner is but one. We also have Stephen Berger. We've got Lillian Gewurtzman, who's still part of our community. This wall is really filled with the people who built this museum and continue to do this educational work.
That's great. That's great. And some of them actually, do they come for special events as well?
They certainly do. So in coronavirus, they've actually, I'm completely impressed. They've all become very proficient on Zoom, and they're actually doing a tremendous amount of virtual programming. So we're still able to put them right in front of students in a classroom through a computer. I know that Thorin uses them and works with them a lot for our public programming. But also when they're able to, they are right here in this building, speaking with students live or speaking with other community groups live.
Good.
You know, Stewart, one more comment just about that. Coming up on Monday is the anniversary of Kristallnacht, and we're running a number of programs with various survivors who are going to be speaking at various places, all through Zoom, but they're involved in our programming still, very much just like what Helen said.
Right. So you do these special programs. There are 3 times a year that the Holocaust is remembered. There's the International Holocaust Day, then the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, and then the Kristallnacht. So do you do that? Do you have special programs around all those 3 events?
Well, for sure we have events then, but I would say we don't limit it to just 3 times a year. We're running programs throughout the year that are drawing attention to the history of the Holocaust. On those 3 days, as you mentioned, those tend to be when a number of other organizations and synagogues gather and want to have some event to mark that anniversary. And so we work with them. Let's take a look further into the next gallery. All right, so this is our second gallery. And this is a gallery that really explores the rise of the Nazi Party and the rise of Hitler. And it's a gallery that covers a great deal of information, and we're not going to try and cover that now. But I'm standing in front of one of the more powerful images in our gallery, which I think you can see is a photograph of one of the Nazi Party rallies. This is the 1934 Nazi Party rally in Nuremberg. And one of the things to see here is first the scale of these Nazi Party rallies, and Hitler was able to foster a sense of German nationalism to support the Nazi Party. It was really unrivaled. And it made, for these massive demonstrations and massive celebrations of the Nazi Party, and these were often held down in Nuremberg, this one of those. And you can see here, though, that it's a strange photo because they look like soldiers. Uniforms, rows and rows of people, and yet they're not carrying guns, they're carrying shovels. And that's because in 1934, the Nazis and Hitler were still abiding by the Versailles Treaty that limited the Nazi military. But it was something that Hitler quickly did away with, and pretty soon thereafter started to build up the German military. So that's what this photo is.
So right now we're still in Gallery 2, but we've moved down the timeline into the portion where we're really talking about how things begin to change in Nazi Germany. So here what we really like to focus on with our groups is a bench. Now the bench says in German, only for Aryans, and here we have a little boy sitting on it and reading. Now this might look like an innocent photograph, but what we can really see is the segregation of the Jewish population from the Aryan population in Germany. And this is really emblematic of so many laws that were passed, which really curtailed Jewish life in Germany and really signaled the Nazi racial ideology coming to the fore.
You know, right next to where Helen is, if she just backs up a little, then you can see part of our exhibition that talks about Kristallnacht, the event that you and I both mentioned just a moment ago. But obviously one of the major turning points of the Holocaust in November of 1939, when the Nazis instigate and plan an attack on the Jews of Germany and Austria. Burning synagogues like the one right next to Helen, arresting 30,000 Jewish men who were sent to concentration camps, breaking into Jewish-owned businesses, breaking into Jewish homes. And that was kind of the last straw, where any German Jews who had thought that maybe they could ride out the Nazi Party's rule really recognized that there was no more a chance for them to stay in Germany. And so they tried to get out. Right.
Kristallnacht means a night of broken glass. It's November 9th and through 10th. And really, they broke into, as you say, synagogues and stores. Jewish storekeepers had their homes, stores broken into. It was really traumatic, was it not?
Yeah, I think actually the term Kristallnacht underplays the importance of that event. Because as you said, it means the night of broken glass or the night of crystal glass. But really, we're talking about the destruction of millions of dollars worth of property, the destruction of synagogues, burning them down, and the arrest of Jewish men, and even the murder. There were about 100 Jews who were murdered during Kristallnacht. So to think of it as just the night of broken glass is, I think, misleading.
Of the 30,000 men who were arrested, were they mostly released within
Most
a few
of them
weeks?
were released.
Yes.
The idea was really to get them to leave Germany, to get the Jews to leave Germany. And so they were arrested, and then most of them were released when they signed a pledge saying they would leave the country.
And they attempted to, and nobody would take them.
Right, and that's just the next section of our exhibit. Why don't we wander over here?
Okay.
As we talked about in our last gallery, Kristallnacht really was for so many the straw that broke the camel's back. People tried desperately to get out of Germany. And for many of them, what became a symbol of hope really was the voyage of the St. Louis. But as we know, it's often called the ill-fated voyage of the St. Louis. The over 900 passengers that were on board, overwhelmingly Jewish, when they arrived in Cuba, they were denied entry. In our museum, once again, we take sort of this very large global history and bring it down to the local. And we really do that with an image of one of our former chairman's family, the Mayer family. And their journey out of Hamburg, they board the St. Louis, they try to go to Cuba, they're denied entry, and they end up getting off in England where they do survive. But for so many, this really illustrated how it was so difficult to get out of Nazi-occupied territory, and would become, for so many, the repeated story of attempted
failed attempts to get out of different countries.
The United States, I'm sorry, the United States rejected them because they said there are quotas and we're not going to break the quota, right?
Yes, they were rejected by the United States because of that.
Right.
So this gallery really serves as a turning point. And from here, we really move to World War II, the beginning of World War II, the Nazi occupation. And then as we move through into the Einsatzgruppen, the mobile killing units, the ghettos, and the camps.
You mentioned that when the museum is open and school kids are out there, you do have a lot of school children. Do you remember the numbers?
I sure do. So on average, last year we saw 23,000 school children. And so that's a tremendous number. It's a lot of students from Long Island, Nassau County, but also we do see students from sort of Queens, the New York area, and we were also already doing video conferencing. We were really lucky that we were already thinking about the digital world, and we were already bringing students from Australia, Italy, right here into our museum and educational experience. But yes, often these galleries are buzzing with young people discussing this difficult history.
That's an interesting point, Thorin. Do you the fact that you're able to do video, virtual programming allows you to go to Australia, allows you to go to England, really to encompass the world. So in a sense, it's really opened up a new world for you, has it not?
Yeah, as Helen said, we were already doing it before Corona, which made us kind of well situated to expand after everybody became much more used to these virtual programs. But it has opened up opportunities, but we also know that we're competing now globally because institutions all over the world are issuing virtual programs. So we've got to, again, strengthen our connection to our local community and try and come up with some innovative programs that are going to inspire interest all over.
Now, my number, is it 23 Holocaust museums in the United States? Is that, I think, something?
I don't know what the number is.
I'm trying to remember what the number
There are
is.
a lot of
There's a
them.
lot.
Yeah, there are a lot of Holocaust museums.
In our local area, of course, we've got the Museum of Jewish Heritage in Lower Manhattan, and we've got the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum down in D.C. Those are massive institutions.
So what separates yours? What makes yours unique?
Yeah, so what makes the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center of Nassau County special, I think, is we're the only one that is talking about the connection between this global history with Nassau County. And so an image like this one of the Mayer family, Howard Mayer lives here in Nassau County. It's his family that we show. The pictures on the wall that we started with are also people who live in Nassau County and their family members. So we're always connecting to the local community.
This is actually the Greater German Reich as of 1945. And this is a map that we use with all of our groups to really illustrate the widespread network of concentration camps, transit camps, POW camps, slave labor camps, and of course, most notorious, the death camps. And it's estimated that there are about 44,000 camps within this network. And I think that number alone, the sheer magnitude of it is often very overwhelming. But in our camp room, which I know Thorin is going to take us through, we've got images that once again take this experience from being one of numbers and maps to one of human beings and their real lived experience. Thorin?
Yeah, so we've got, as you can see, photographs. There's also videotaped testimony and other objects that capture the history of what went on in these thousands of camps. There's no one way to tell that story. In fact, I would say it's an impossible story to actually comprehend. But we try and convey the breadth of the experience and what it was like in these camps with the crowding, the starvation, the disease, and the murder. Maybe one of our most powerful objects is not actually right here, but in the next room, and it's an object that helped save the life of Alex Rosner. So let's take a peek over there. So this is the item I was talking about. It's an accordion, a children's accordion. Alex Rosner was 9 years old when his family was forced into the ghetto in Krakow. And they were luckily saved by Oskar Schindler, at least for a time. But eventually, Alex and his father, who was a famous violinist, were deported to Auschwitz. And his father was recognized as they were going through the selection process. And one of the Nazi guards pulled him aside to save him. He would play music, the thought was, and that would save him from the gas chamber. But Alex Rossner's father said he would only perform if his son could join him. And so one of the guards ran to the Canada warehouse and picked up this accordion that some other child had probably brought with them to Auschwitz and been killed with. But the accordion was given to Alex, and Alex showed that he could play it. And so it helped save his life. And his father, who also was obviously performing, they were able to survive because of the musical skills they had and because of the instruments. Alex Rossner later moved to the United States and lives in Long Island City, I believe now. And he donated the accordion to us.
Wow. Great story.
Maybe we can take the story now to a slightly happier spot and talk about the liberation of the camps and rescue.
Okay, here we are.
Here we are. So this is our gallery room that talks about the complexities of liberation, rescue, and of course, life after the Holocaust. Now, for me, what I find very interesting in this room, once again, showing that we are such a local museum, is that little boy that I showed you in the beginning, Werner Reich, he was able to survive the Holocaust. He was in a number of camps, including Auschwitz and Mauthausen, from where he was liberated. And it's here in our liberation section that we once again have items relating to Werner Reich. We have his release papers from Mauthausen, which were extraordinarily important. They were the only thing he had to identify who he was at that time. And you can see the creases of the paper where it's been folded so many times and taken care of. We also have this extraordinarily unique bracelet, which he got made for him in Mauthausen, which contains his prison number and a small etching of the gates at Mauthausen. So when Werner was liberated at 17, he was 64 pounds. On the brink of starvation, extremely unwell. And this is this different, looking at how Werner must have looked, what the experience must have been like. You both got the survivor experience, those who survived the camps, and also our young liberators. Right, we've got young men, young women coming into these camps and really finding the unexplainable. So while we highlight survivors in this section, we also turn our eye to liberators. We have two liberators featured also right here. The first being Hai Horowitz, who was a young man who helped to liberate Ohrdruf, was a very prominent member of our museum until his passing. And we've also got Jim Vomeralty. He happened to write a letter home to his family, and we have that letter in our museum. And it so deeply speaks to the pain and the anger that he felt upon witnessing what human beings have been put through in the concentration camps. So we see both survival, pain, liberation, and rescue, really seeing the complexities of this moment. And as we travel throughout this gallery, as we move through liberation, we turn it over to rescue, and finally to displaced persons camps. So back over to you, Thorin.
Yeah, so this is a section that we talk about the DP camps, the displaced persons camps, and we know that there were hundreds of these camps that were set up by the Allies all through Central and Southern Europe. And again, these are photos that are connected and objects connected to people in Nassau County or the family members who moved to Nassau County.
Yeah, to be clear, the DP camps was set up after the war.
That's right. After the war, the Allies set up the DP camps to house people who had no home to go to. The Jews who had survived in the death camps or who had survived in hiding came out and they found they had no homes to go back to. They found that they were not welcome in the villages where they had come from, or that all their family members in those hometowns had been murdered. And so they did not feel comfortable going back to those places, and instead were housed temporarily, at least in the DP camps. Although the idea, both from the Allies and for many of the residents of the DP camps, was they were temporary. They were meant to house the people just until they could find their way to either Israel, to another country, or to America.
And some of those who did go back to their former homes found that they were being inhabited by other Germans. And they said, this is my house now. leave, and so they couldn't come back.
It's certainly true. The anti-Semitism that was present during the war didn't just end at the end of the war. And so, yeah, there were some famous pogroms that came in Poland after the end of the war, where the Jewish residents had tried to return to their homes and found people living there, people who refused to leave, and crowds who were willing to beat them, even kill them, rather than let them stay. So that was the kind of saddest part of the aftermath of the war, is that the victory of the Allies didn't secure freedom or protection for the Jews.
Right, right.
But the DP camps really became a place where the survivors got to recreate their lives or restart their lives. And especially, as you can imagine, since the very old were mostly murdered, the very young mostly murdered, but it was the group in the middle that survived. And so those had a life ahead of them. And what happens in the DP camps, and I don't know if you can see some of these photos, but this is a great picture of Lillian Gortzman, one of the women, one of the little girls that Helen pointed out at the beginning of our gallery. Here she is, right in the middle here, in the DP camp, holding a new briefcase, having just finished a class that taught her with some work skills to help this group of surviving women get new jobs. You can also see maybe some of the other photos here. This one is great too. It's got all these survivors with their baby carriages, because you saw huge birth rates in the DP camps as the survivors started to restart families. In fact,
I was going to ask, do we know how many babies were born in the DP camps?
I don't know the number, but it is the DP camps were the place where the highest birth rates of anywhere on the planet at the time. You know, our museum has a lot more to show. We have another gallery that's really all about the genocides and atrocities that have happened since the end of the Holocaust, where we focus not only on the victims and on the perpetrators, but also on some of the upstanders, the people who are fighting or have fought to combat prejudice and combat racism. And we want the message for visitors to our museum to be that they can work to stop prejudice, to stop racism, and to stop anti-Semitism. Not necessarily all by themselves, but working with others to use their powers to make the world a better place. And I think that's the kind of final lesson that we want to take away from the Holocaust. Not only never again, but it's a message of empowerment, that we can shape the future. And that's what we want people to get from this. I will say one other thing, and maybe we can take a quick peek in there. We have a temporary exhibit gallery as well. And right now we've just opened an exhibition of Holocaust art made by a Nassau County artist named Tamima, whose parents were both survivors of the Holocaust. And she kind of channels her parents' struggles, her mother's struggles, and her own struggles as the daughter of a survivor in the creation of her art. So maybe we'll take a quick peek in there and then finish up. This is our temporary exhibition room, and maybe you can get some sense of the sculptures that are here now. But we try and have a rotating series of exhibitions through this space that relate to the history, to art, or to other perspectives about the Holocaust or other genocides and contemporary concerns. So this is just maybe a last place to stop. And I encourage everybody out there, come and make an appointment and give us a call and try and come visit us and see these things in person. We are open, but we have to abide by strict limits on the number of people in the galleries at a time. So it's really helpful to get a reservation in advance.
What's the most common question you get?
You know, we really get a range of questions. A lot of people come in with very little knowledge of the Holocaust, particularly some of the students who come in, but others come in with personal family history and a real connection and a desire to learn more. So I don't know about a particularly common question, but I will say what I brought you over here to see was an object that struck my attention the first time I came here. And that is this beer stein. And maybe from a distance, it just looks like a colorful beer stein. It's actually, when you look at it very closely, full of anti-Semitic tropes and anti-Semitic sayings. It's a pretty offensive beer stein. On the top, there are quotes, 5 anti-Semitic quotes from various different figures mostly from the 19th century. And then on the body of it, there are both caricatures that show Jews with elongated noses, kind of frog-like eyes, and wearing these bizarre hats. This is a beer stein from the 1890s, and it really captures the anti-Semitism that existed in Germany in the 1890s. And one of the things that I think is interesting about it is it shows, or it's one example, of the fact that anti-Semitism was certainly not new in the 1930s. Anti-Semitism pre-existed Hitler and the Nazi Party, and yet there was no Holocaust in the 1890s. So one of the things I always talk about when I talk about the beer stein is that it's not enough to explain the Holocaust to just say it's because of anti-Semitism. There was something else, or a number of other factors. And the fact that there was no Holocaust in 1890 when somebody felt comfortable drinking out of a beer stein full of anti-Semitic tropes is a suggestion that maybe there's something different going on in the 1930s that Hitler taps into or generates in addition to anti-Semitism. So that's just one of the objects.
Talk about that. What did Hitler tap into? I think it was the aftermath of World War I and how the Allies treated the defeated Germans after the war, and the reparations and what have you. They really was very significant, was it not?
Yeah, I mean, we've got a few other items in our gallery that deal with this, but one of the things is in the aftermath of World War I, there was a real dramatic change going on in Germany. There was actually chaos. There was the end of the war, the end of World War I that came in November 11th, 1918, with a surprise surrender to most Germans. They had been told that the war was going well, and then suddenly an armistice is signed and Germany surrenders. And then in the wake of that surrender, there's actually a revolution that takes place in Germany with fighting in the streets of Berlin and other cities of Germans against Germans, really a struggle for what Germany was going to be like. And then on top of that, it's the end of the Kaiserreich. The Kaiser abdicates, the monarchy ends, and Germany goes from being a monarchy to a democracy overnight with very little preparation. And we, I think in America, who are used to democracy, we think of it as something that's easy and the best way to rule. But for a country that never had democracy to suddenly be placed with a democratic government and to feel that that was going to secure power and that was going to create order, it didn't move smoothly. And we know that in the wake of World War I, in this new democracy in Germany, there was economic chaos caused by the reparations payments of the Versailles Treaty. But even after that got taken control, it was a very divided country and there was a lot of political instability. And it's Hitler is able to really build on that and take that to use for his own benefit and to rise in power.
Right, and basically to tell the people, we're better than this, and we can rise up and we can be a great nation once again. And
absolutely. And you know, it's an old idea, but one that Hitler uses perhaps better than most, which is to blame one group and to separate off one group and tell the rest that they are the ones who are better. And so blaming the Jews and the communists for the defeat of World War I was a tool that Hitler used. And then separating Germany and claiming or deciding who were the in people, the Aryans, as the Nazis called them, and who were the outsiders, and the Jews were the outsiders. And so to separate off the Jews made the Aryans feel better and feel like they were special and help them feel better about Germany. So that was the kind of nationalism that Hitler created.
The idea of having a scapegoat, I guess, goes back centuries, does it not?
Certainly does. But Hitler turned scapegoatism into really something new because of the way he rallied an entire nation to blame the Jews, who made up less than 1% of the German population. So a teeny percentage of the German population is blamed for all the country's woes. You know, today in America, I think that Native Americans account for about 1% of the American population. How would it be if Americans blamed the Native Americans for all the things that were wrong with the country? That's the kind of percentage that we're talking about in the 1930s in Germany, blaming 1% for all the problems. But because of anti-Semitism and the currents of anti-Semitism that remained in Europe, and because of Hitler's abilities and the economic problems, all of that helped Hitler generate the support for this kind of wacky idea that you could blame 1% for all the problems.
You know, I always do a what if. what if the Jews were able to go to other countries? Hitler did not want to kill them. He wanted them out of the country. And he said, leave, go, and it was only after nobody else would take them that he decided to kill them all. Am I right?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard with counterfactuals. Who knows what would have happened? But it's certainly the case that the Nazis initially sought just to get the Jews out of Germany. And there was the plan to send them to Madagascar. But what changed was, I think, when Hitler and when the Nazis invaded Poland and suddenly gained control over some 3 million Polish Jews, suddenly the Nazis had this much larger catchment area to control and had the power to do something more. They were no longer talking about expelling the Jews. In 1942, they moved quickly to murder, mass murder of the Jews.
Helen, after the war, the United States recruited a number of the Nazis, the senior Nazis who were involved in the U-2 program, the missile program, and brought them to the United States to develop the American space program. And the top scientists, Werner von Braun, I guess the most famous, were brought to the United States. And how do you understand that?
Unfortunately, Stewart, I think it's both complex and also quite simple. I think when, we're looking at opportunity, right? And gathering scientists and gathering other people from different parts of society to bring them to the United States and looking away from some of the atrocities that they have been part of, complicit to, or have participated in. And unfortunately, we really see a moment of opportunity to put American interests and the furthering of science for the United States and really looking away from the history and from what people have been comfortable to back in Europe.
If I might add, one of the other things, we quickly went from World War II to the Cold War. And suddenly our former ally, the Soviet Union, became our arch enemy. And the enemy of your enemy is your friend. So the enemy of the Soviet Union had been the Nazis. So some of those Nazis were seen as helpful in the fight against the Soviet Union that America embraced in the wake of World War II. And so turned quickly to get those former Nazis to be helpful in the fight against the Cold War.
And when people were asked about the Nazis, they kind of shrugged, and the war was over, and the Nazis were allowed, basically the rank and file, they were allowed to go on and start up their own businesses and whatnot. I think only Arthur Rudolph was the only space Nazi scientist who was brought here for the space program who was sent back, deported, or he gave up his citizenship and left. Am I right?
I'm not sure if there were other scientists as well, but I think we're talking about a change that happened where, first of all, Germany had no interest in sustaining the memory of World War II and sustaining its involvement in the Holocaust. They were happy to sweep that history under the rug, at least 1945. And then America also becomes complicit in that same sweeping under the rug, because we feel as a nation that we need to focus more on the Cold War. And so any of that history, we backpedal. America backpedals from focusing on justice for the Nazi perpetrators. So even though there are war crime trials, and of course there's the famous International Military Tribunal in Nuremberg, but there are follow-up trials. And if you look closely, you see that most of the people who are even found guilty or even sentenced to death are actually released, because the general interest in America and in Germany is to move past World War II. And it really takes until the 1990s before the next generation or two generations later can say, let's look more at what we really did in Germany. And in America, I think we're confronting that history too. And there's been more research done about our complicity in sweeping that history under the rug before.
Yes. And now we see a few of the Nazis being brought to trial, but they're in their 90s now, and there's little, I don't know, it's not gonna, nothing much is gonna happen. As we see, even when the man was convicted, he got a suspended sentence.
I mean, I don't know what Helen thinks, but I know that, how do you define justice for the Holocaust? I mean, you would have to arrest and imprison and everybody in Germany, plus in the countries of occupied Europe. So what is justice? And yeah, is it justice now in 2020 to arrest a 90-year-old man and make him die in Germany or in a prison? I mean, it's better than him feeling like he got away with it, but that doesn't feel like justice either. I don't know, Helen, do you have thoughts about justice?
I agree. I think it's very, very complicated. I think there's a lot in the symbology of arresting a former Nazi and then prosecuting to the full extent of the law. I think there's a lot of symbolism there. But I agree with Thorin. What is justice and what can it really look like? Because, is there any way to have a just end to such a massive atrocity and loss of human life? And in my experience, I continue to come back to the answer of no.
And one of the things we hear from a lot of the survivors we work with and the descendants of survivors is the thing that they are most proud of, the thing that they want to get out there is that they survived, they had children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and that this wall of photographs is not gone, that those people had the next generations that followed with them. And so a lot of the descendants of Holocaust survivors want to make sure that people know that their family has many children and that the community lives on.
Exactly. And as you say, when they had the trials, a number of people were sentenced, but then released a short time later and went on to live their own lives. And it was forgotten, really. I mean, it was, nobody wanted to talk about the war. Nobody wanted to talk about the lessons. That's why when you had the Demjanjuk trial a number of years ago, people said it was not only justice, but it taught the new generation. Some of whom said the Holocaust never happened. And it showed them, the people came forth and said, yes, we were guilty. We did it. And I think that was an educational tool as well.
Yeah, there's no doubt that the Eichmann trial in 1961 was a real eye-opener that brought survivors back to talk about their own experiences and drew new attention back on the Holocaust, 15 years later, 16 years after the war. And I think that started the new call for turning back to that history. But it's been a constant cycle of trying to draw attention back and trying to find a way to provide justice.
And if you look at YouTube, the entire Eichmann trial is on YouTube. They had recorded it, and it's now on YouTube. It's very enlightening if you watch it. So.
And if I may, a lot of our second gens remember watching that trial as very young people. And for them, it really was an awakening about who their parents were based on their parents who were survivors, their reaction to that trial. And as Thorin said, it really began a shift in consciousness, maybe globally, but also a shift in conversation within families and family memory. And while we have all this kind of global silencing and complicity of countries willing to forget, we also have the silencing of survivors, which this trial really allowed them. It gave them space to start to talk about their own experiences. And then, of course, as we look at the 90s, we have so many Holocaust museums opening up in the 90s, including our own. And we're now sort of in another wave of Holocaust education of what do we do when our survivors are not here, and how do they pass the torch to their children and grandchildren, which is a huge emphasis of our museum and education center.
Great, good. And by the way, as I recall, there are really no steps. You don't have to worry about steps when you come to your museum because it's right there on the first floor. Am I right?
This is true. Our museum is handicap accessible for the entire ground floor, and we will do whatever it takes to make sure that this is the most accessible experience that you can have with us.
Yeah, very important. Well, very good. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Stewart. Really appreciate it.
Thorin Tritter, he's the director of the museum, and Helen Turner, director of education at the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center of Nassau County. Thank you both very much. This has been Jewish Life. My name is Stewart Ain, and until next week, have a good one.